Oh my God, it's like the greatest Moon Knight story ever told. God, the ending of this is amazing. So this opens up with Moon Knight on a rooftop with a bunch of vampires. Bear with me because this is dope. So the way this works is he's looking for a guy called the Tutor. So what he does is he tells them the sun's rising, but because of the nature of the Alchemax building, the sun isn't directly hitting them. Instead, as the sun rises and as the earth spins, it'll move around the Alchemax building. And so he says, imagine it as a kind of sundial. Every 3 minutes, one of you is going to die. Tell me where the Tutor is. Now, here's the thing. This switches over to Taskmaster. Now, this is an amazing moment in Marvel Comics, right? Because this guy, the Tutor, literally tells Taskmaster, I have a guy that I want you to kill. I need you to kill Moon Knight. And Taskmaster's like, nah, bro. I ain't going after Moon Knight, man. That guy's crazy. Now, Tutor has no idea who he's messing with, and it shows. And even Taskmaster picks it up because Tutor's just kind of like, I mean, I don't really understand. Like, why won't you go after Moon Knight? I mean, you're a mercenary. You're like the greatest fighter in the world. You learn how to fight the way other people fight as you fight them. That's your power. And literally his response is like, okay, so you and your whole vampire pyramid scheme thing, the structure, whatever it's called, it's a really great racket. And you guys are really powerful and you're really capable. But Moon Knight is on a whole different level. And he says the last people who sent me after him had his full jacket. They knew exactly what this guy was about, right? United States Marine Corps, CIA, freelance mercenary work. This guy in the jungle taking out people who were otherwise impossible to catch, that's his whole thing, right? Then you put him in a city and then it just becomes even more dangerous because now it's not just a gun he has hiding among the brush. The entirety of the city is his weapon. And so the Tutor responds and says, okay, but like at the end of the day, this guy's just a guy, right? I mean, me and my people as vampires, we've left our humanity behind a long time ago. We're exceedingly fast, we're exceedingly capable, right? Like, why would this guy be of any concern to us? And Taskmaster does this amazing thing, right? He pulls out a 45 caliber bullet, like a hollow point. And he says, this is a 45 caliber ACP, a hollow point, a flying ashtray. And he says, you put one of these through a person, it comes out the other end, turned upside down and inside out, mushroomed, torn up, twisted from the soft tissue trauma that it's caused. That's Moon Knight. He'll come at you faster than the speed of sound, go right through you, and won't care what it'll do to him. And when he comes out of the other side, he'll leave a hole in your life big enough to drive the L train through. Now, this is like an amazing point that he makes because he says, look, I mean, if you wanted me to go after Spider-Man, sure. You want me to take out Daredevil? Yeah, I'll give it a run. I mean, I've even made a career out of going after Captain America. But Moon Knight? No, man, I'm not messing with that guy. That guy is absolutely insane. And so because Taskmaster ultimately just kind of walks away from the whole thing, Tutor ends up turning to two characters in order to take Moon Knight out in his stead. He ends up going with Nimian and Grand Maul. We'll talk about them here in a little bit because they're not overly important, but they are kind of interesting. But what Taskmaster also does in response to this is he goes and he finds Mark Spector after having killed all these vampires and basically freed the kids that they were going to consume. That's the Tutor's real gripe here, is that Mark Spector is basically freeing the various people that they would otherwise be feeding on and then taking out vampires all around the city, as well as grabbing vampires that are willing to join his cause and bringing them to his side. In this case, Reese, who unintentionally turned Soldier into vampires. If you're not overly familiar with him, it's not over important here, but the thing is that Taskmaster approaching Moon Knight is almost kind of a professional courtesy. Hey, like, we fought side by side. Sure, we don't necessarily get along in the best way, but like at the end of the day, at the very least, I feel like it's the right thing to do. So he effectively warns him that the Tutor is coming after him and he's going to be sending some kind of a mercenary to target this guy. Now, at that point, you kind of branch away from the main story for a second and you focus on the three identities of Mark Spector, Steve Grant, and Jake Lockley. Now, the reason why this matters is because during the Jed MacKay run, which is what we're covering here, that you didn't really see a lot of them. They were just kind of gone one day. And in reality, they just sort of vanished after the age of Khonshu. What was that? That was a story that took place in Avengers where literally Moon Knight dominated the entirety of the Avengers team. It was a really, really amazing moment. But with these personalities kind of remanifesting, what you get here is a bit of a fight and kind of a skirmish between Nimian, Grand Maul, and Mark Spector. And really, they just kind of dominate him here, right? I mean, they take him out quite readily, but it's not really the conflict that Jed McKay focuses on. What he focuses on is the conversation between the three, because what these personalities are doing is effectively kind of bickering. The reality here is Steve Grant and Jake Lockley look at Mark Spector and say, yes, you're very capable. There's a lot that you can do, but you could do so much more if you had us as your personalities. I get that, like, you wanted to be in control. You wanted to kind of make the decision on what your life was going to look like. But the reality here is that when you look at Reese, who is an ally on your side, but she's a vampire, she's not trying to cure herself. She's not trying to get rid of her vampirism. She accepts the fact that that's just who she is. That's what you need to do. You need to stop rejecting Jake Lockley and myself, you know, kind of speaking from the perspective of Steve Grant. And you have to accept the fact that you are just 1/3 of a trio, and that together we're greater than the sum of our parts. We have to start working together. And this kind of plea really proves to be true when Mark Spector is taken out by Nimian and Grand Maul. And so what you get in the midst of all this is you get Hunter's Moon and Tigra, who arrive on the scene. Tigra doesn't matter. She's just like a girl who was kind of spying on him and reporting back to the Avengers, whatever. Tigra's never mattered. Hunter's Moon is really interesting. For those of you guys who have not been following our Moon Knight coverage, Hunter's Moon is basically just another fist of Khonshu. That for decades in Marvel Comics, we had the moon god Khonshu, and then Moon Knight was his avatar on Earth, and that was it. With Hunter's Moon, we learned there was another fist of Khonshu that had been chosen as well, and he ultimately came into conflict with Mark Spector. But he's basically every bit as capable and every bit as powerful as Moon Knight is. And so basically allying himself with Steve Grant and Jake Lockley, allowing these personalities to re-emerge, they in turn play their own individual roles. For example, when it comes to Moon Knight and the Midnight Mission, which is basically his kind of base of operations where people around the neighborhood will come to him and ask for help, everybody pays in cash. Steve Grant has historically been the billionaire. And while Moon Knight has lost pretty much all of his money, Steve Grant is the means by which they can start building all that up. Specifically, through money laundering, which is pretty shady, but also kind of a smart thing to do. At the same time, Jake Lockley, that's the cab driver personality, right? That's the guy that has his ear to the ground, hearing about what's going on the street level. And so between these three different personalities, they're able to kind of piece together what's going on with the Tutor and what it is the Tutor was referring to when he was talking about how he was the second most powerful vampire in the city of New York, that there is somebody out there in the vampire world that he fears. But they're also able to pull together information about Nimian and Grand Maul. And what we learn is that, as a lot of you guys have probably guessed by now, if you're familiar with Greek mythology, he takes his name from the Nimian lion of mythology, right? Unbreakable skin. For Grand Maul, she has these gauntlets on her hand that deal these electric shocks to anybody that she goes after, which creates what's basically a Grand Maul seizure, you know, shorting out their nervous system and basically killing them. But they learn pretty quickly that they're very capable, right? The Grand Maul and Nimian are pretty capable. They're not the most important ever, but they're still pretty powerful in their own right. And so what ends up happening is that Mark Spector ends up traveling to Chinatown while Hunter's Moon goes directly after Nimian and Grand Maul, because they both have two different ideologies on how they should function. That Hunter's Moon is more just straight to the point, attacking the foe, bringing the immediate threat to an end. Mark Spector, at least in more recent years, is a little more reserved, right? He's a little more, let's get more information, let's find out what's going on. He's very Batman-esque in that way, which Moon Knight fans hate it when you say that, but it doesn't change the fact that it's true. But when they get to Chinatown, what they end up doing is meeting with a woman named Lady Yulon. Now, the reason why she's so important here is that in Marvel Comics, when it comes to vampires, of course, the most notable vampire out there is Vlad Dracula, but he's not the oldest. There are vampires that were around long before him. And in fact, there's vampires out there that are more powerful than he is. It's just by whatever manner and whatever means, he's effectively seized control of, like, Chernobyl, where really the most dangerous vampires reside. But what we end up finding out here is that at some point along the line, Lady Yulon had basically served under the direct control of another vampire named Yi Yang. And the reality here is she was operating as a vampire like 1,000 years before Dracula ever showed up. She is exceedingly powerful, but the big concern that Tutor has is literally Yi Yang herself. More so than that, the other part of this, and the reason why Lady Yulon simply just doesn't leave Chinatown, is because they ultimately struck a truce. That Lady Yulon had basically abandoned Yang and in turn struck out on her own. But abandoning your master in the world of vampires, that's a big no-no. And so while she is able to remain underground and largely hidden, that when Tutor had basically turned himself into a vampire by stealing the blood of other vampires and then consuming it, a truce was struck in the form of basically Tutor saying, you let me create my own organization and function over here, and I won't tell Yang that you're over there. So it was kind of blackmail to a degree, but for the most part, it worked. But what Mark Spector does is he says between the two of them, they're both hunting for the same person, right? They're both trying to take out Tutor. So while she can't act directly, what she can do is give him information that will let him achieve his goal, right? Switch over to Hunter's Moon, facing off against Nimian and Grand Mal. This fight is interesting and it's cool just because for the most part, Hunter's Moon is able to hold his own to a degree, but ultimately he's overpowered. But it's not really because of Grand Mal and Nimian, it's because they call in vampire forces from the Tutor, which are basically able to overwhelm Hunter's Moon, and then in turn, the guy's neck is broken and they simply just walk away, right? So like they kill him on the spot. And so following this, you basically pick up with Mark Spector as he ultimately tracks down Grand Mal and Nimian, going after both of them. And it's this really, really dope moment because it's one of these things that like he does in more recent years, right? It'll be one of these things where like he'll ensnare somebody and he'll be like, welcome to the midnight mission, right? Like worship with me or something along those lines. Like it's just like this really cool moment. And so they kind of taunt him, right? And they tell him like, you know, we killed your sidekick, we'll kill you too. And his response is like, you'll try, right? You'll try your best. But the reality here is we did our research on you. We know exactly what you are. Like we treated you like supervillains before. The reality is that you're just hired killers. Sure, you have powers, but you have no real basis behind what you do outside of a desire to make money. So all we really have to do is find a way to demoralize you. And so drawing on the power of Khonshu, he pulls them in to the Midnight Mission, which is sort of a term with a double meaning. The Midnight Mission is one part the base of operations, but it's almost a kind of ethereal realm to a degree. And for the most part, it shows these people in a lot of ways their darkest horrors and their greatest fears, right? Putting Nimian in a position where he's like basically buried alive, forcing Grand Mal to experience like all the death and destruction from the place that she came from, right? Forcing her to kind of relive her past to a degree. And so when they emerge within the Midnight Mission, this kind of ethereal realm, the response of Midnight is, be welcome, supplicants. And it's like so horrifying to these guys, right? Like they're so far out of their element. They've never experienced anything like this before. And that's the other half of them not being supervillains. If you're Dr. Octopus from the Spider-Man mythos, you've seen all kinds of stuff. You've seen what Dr. Doom is capable of. You've seen what Spider-Man is capable of, Magneto and all these different characters. But when you're just like some hired guns out there in the world and your big task is to like take out some dictator, you're basically small time. And they've never experienced anything like this. And so ultimately, Nimian says like, we'll give you whatever it was that we were paid and you'll never see either of us again. And his response is, that's not my decision to make. And it's like one of the most amazing moments in the story, right? He says, that's not my decision to make. You killed Hunter's Moon. I said I did my research. You didn't do yours. Hunter's Moon is not my sidekick. He's my brother. He's a fist of Khonshu, and fists of Khonshu don't die. And they don't. They always like come back, right? Like they end up coming back. It's just kind of like the benefit, but also the curse at the same time. Now, the other thing here is that while these folks are basically taken out quite readily, that part of the information, or at least really the big brunt of the information given to Moon Knight by Lady Yulon, was that there's a kind of big coming together of vampire groups from across the world. They're all being brought together by Tutor. And his hope is to basically unify all these different vampire groups and then lead them against the forces of Dracula and basically try to usurp control of the entirety of the vampire world and then form a singular vampire nation that would basically be under himself. Now, in the midst of all of this, he kind of goes on this big, sort of tirade talking about like the days of the past and superheroes and supervillains villains and yada, 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 and great big huge conflicts, and that's old hat, right? Like under us, there will only be a world of vampires and a world of cattle, and that'll basically be it. Enter Nimian and Grand Mall being thrown through a skylight and landing on the floor. And then literally Moon Knight just shows up and it's like, this is a party, right? So let's party. And so in that moment, you have Tutor who just kind of dismisses this whole situation. So like, this is what I was talking about, guys. Like, this is what I was referring to, right? This guy, Moon Knight, and the things he represents, this is all old hat stuff, right? This guy's ancient history. I vote that we kill this guy now as a semblance of our new union and the new direction that things are going to be going in. Now, here's the kicker of all of this, right? Reese and Soldier, two people who are vampires but are allies of Moon Knight, what they're doing is they've actually snuck into the building and they're tapping into the water systems, right? Security systems, the whole 9 yards. And what they're doing is hacking the sprinkler system. And so there comes this moment where Moon Knight is like, okay, so like you made a good speech, now it's time for mine, right? And he says, you've all come here under the impression that New York is safe for you, that it represents territory to be profited from. And he says, I'm sorry that you came so far and labored for so long under that misapprehension, because this is my city and I will brook no trespassers from blood drinkers. And again, it's kind of dismissed. It's like, okay, so like that was a really interesting and amazing speech, but like my patience is running out, right? And so then turn Moon Knight's like, I mean, you guys don't want to see what my secret weapon is? Like my whole thing? Like I got a secret weapon coming, guys. It's gonna be a great big huge thing, you know? And so it's like, okay, everybody have patience, everybody relax. And then he's like, Soldier, now's the time. He pops an umbrella and Soldier fires up the water. And when that happens, it's just the sprinklers raining on everybody. I know it looks dumb. It's so dope. Because what Tutor does, and he's like, this is it. This was your plan, to make it sprinkle, like to turn on the sprinkler systems and to make us, was that your grand plan? Hey guys, I'm Moon Knight. Here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna go to the giant meeting of the vampires and we're gonna turn on the sprinklers and they will get rain on them. Like, is that your real big, huge thing? And he's like, some superhero you are. No wonder Taskmaster didn't want to go after you. You're completely and totally incompetent. And the response of Moon Knight is, you're not listening. I'm not a superhero. I'm a priest, and I consecrate this water to the service of Khonshu, that old miserable bastard. He turns it into holy water, right? Because remember, in order for water to become holy water, it just has to be blessed by a god. It doesn't have to be any one particular god, just a god. Everyone bursts into flames. It's amazing. It's like one of the most amazing things that I've ever seen with Moon Knight, right? Like all these vampires just burst into flames, and that's seemingly the end of them. Those individuals who aren't immediately killed by the holy water ultimately are taken out by like Hunter's Moon, who reemerges with a silver dagger designed to kill vampires. And then that same silver dagger is given to Mark Spector, who ultimately gets down to the Tutor, and where Tutor tries to bargain and tries to reason, what he does is he kills him on the spot. And then in turn, they find one person here who's a human and is actually a spy working in the service of Dracula. And the response of Moon Knight, like what he says is, you're gonna take a message back to Dracula and you're going to tell him what happens when you make a move in the city of New York. This is my city. No one's allowed in this city. If he brings his vampires here, they won't just be met by me. They'll be met by me, my forces, the Midnight Suns, and Blade. With that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this to an end. If you guys wanna get caught up on everything related to Moon Knight, including the Age of Khonshu when he just absolutely buckled the Avengers, make sure you guys check out this playlist, and I will catch you all later. Peace.